All right, we're here with Tom Hart. Tom, from ESPN. Appreciate you coming on the program.
Mark, thanks for having me.
So every guest I always have to ask the pinnacle question is give us your superhero origin story. How did you get from high school kid to now calling, all different kinds of sports with ESPN, including the XFL?
How long is your podcast? I mean, it could take a while to get there. The short story is, you know what? Maybe the pictures can tell the story. See what I
Okay.
got back here. Yeah, all right, this is good. My first job out of school after an internship was with the Winston-Salem Warthogs
Oh,
minor league baseball team. Then I ended up with the Tennessee Smokies, got some of their gear back there. And then the first college baseball game I called was a Tennessee game. Anyway, kind of bounced around a little bit, but got my start in minor league baseball on the radio. And
gotcha.
then got introduced on the television side at a variety of places, CBS Sports Network to Big Ten Network to ESPN. And here we are. That's as short a version as I can tell with props.
Gotcha. And then, of course, the little breaking news here is that you will be calling the XFL championship game this Saturday. Is that correct? Your
Yeah,
team?
it's our regular crew, and I love the folks that I work with. Greg McElroy is in the booth, Cole Kublik and Katie George down on the sideline. We've been together since day one of this version of the XFL. Katie was new to the XFL this year, but Greg, Cole, and I all worked the previous iteration in 20. So that knowledge base, kind of knowing how the production works and what to expect and how we use the audio, which I know you're certainly familiar with.
Mm.
That was already in our background, so it's been a seamless transition.
So, well, all right, we'll go back into the 2020 season. So everything shut down. When you heard that The Rock and Danny Garcia purchased the XFL, what was your reaction to that? And it was returning for a third time.
Well, I was excited. I don't want to say that I expected it, but as soon as it shut down, and then Vince McMahon eventually put it up for sale, I was following it from the jump and trying to figure out like who's going to buy this and how soon could it come back? Like, what's the turnaround time?
Mm.
So I always expected it to come back, to be honest with you, because I viewed it as a fantastic success in 20. And if it wasn't for the pandemic, I would assume McMahon wouldn't have sold it or wouldn't have been in a position to sell. But
Mhm.
I thought it was going great. I love the markets we're in. I love the production values that ESPN and ABC brought to it then. And I thought it had great promise in a variety of different ways, both on the football side and the television production side.
Yeah. So now that you're in, we're kind of coming to the end of the 2023 season. What are some of your standout moments? Which teams or players like really impressed you this season?
Yeah, I start with Anthony Beck. I mean, we showed this graphic a couple times during the season, but here he is coaching against established head coaches, whether that's Bob Stoops, who has a national championship under his belt, or Wade Phillips, who's been in the NFL forever, Greg Williams on the defensive side, former NFL head coach. And Anthony's essentially brand new to coaching, certainly
Mhm.
being a head coach. I mean, his resume, the back of his baseball card, so to speak, pales in comparison from an experience standpoint to a lot of these guys he was coaching against. And I thought he did a masterful job. It just so happened that week one of the season, we opened in Arlington on a Saturday. St. Louis, I think, was in San Antonio or Houston. They're in a Texas city
Yeah.
on Sunday. So when we were at the hotel Friday night, we were staying in the same hotel as the Battlehawks, and ran into Anthony that night and just talked to him about his team and spent a lot of time with him. And I'd worked with him prior at ESPN for one of our bowl games years ago, and I was just so impressed with the grasp that he had on the communication aspect of coaching and leading a team. And I thought they had a tremendous year. Obviously, the fan base at St. Louis blew me away once again. I knew the momentum that they had in 20, and so much of that storyline was derived from proving the NFL and Stan Kroenke wrong. And that
Mhm.
was, not to get too deep into the weeds, but that was before the lawsuit against Kroenke ended up being settled, and the city got all this money from the Rams move to Los Angeles. But the passion didn't die down, and I was kind of curious where that would come from. And this year, not to be too long-winded, In fact, for the championship game, I got my first trip to Audi Field in DC. I was
Mhm.
bummed I didn't get there in 20. I was bummed we didn't get there during the regular season. And my expectations were really high, and that fan base certainly lived up to it. So just those are kind of some of the off the field storylines. I
Mhm.
think there's hundreds of on field storylines and high water moments because these players, created another opportunity, and they were really impressive over the course of the season. You can pick and choose, a half dozen from every team.
Yeah, I mean, especially for Anthony Beck, not only was he a first-time head coach, but he was in the biggest market in the XFL. I mean, the most important. I mean, that kind of drove the ticket sales for the season. So no doubt about that. So as far as the differences between the NFL and the XFL when it comes to the rules, I mean, overall, how did you think the rules played out for the 2023 season?
I thought they went really well. The origination of a lot of these rules goes back to the whatever we want to call it 2.0. I don't know how
Hmm.
properly to reference it, but the 20 season. And I got to tell you, like being involved on the front end of everybody who was part of the league in 20 is these weren't rules that somebody just threw a dart against the wall and said, hey, this might work. The kickoff coverage, especially, was very well thought out. They investigated all of the stats that came with the average return, the average yard line, obviously the injury numbers that we're aware of, which drove the kickoff coverage rule to keep people from flying down the field at 100 miles an hour. The conversions after point afters, very, very well researched in terms of how to create competitiveness, but also adding plays to the game instead of just kicking. So I think all of them went really, really well. Apologize, something is
It's okay.
okay. There you are. Sorry. I know. I thought all the rules went very well over the course of this season. I don't know any that need changing or tweaking. Maybe the tiebreaker needs just a little bit of tweaking
Yeah.
from being able to easily comprehend and share that. I know the league office had a great idea, and they had a great feel for it. But as a broadcaster, I think it became a little bit complicated and hard to share at times. All well intentioned, right? I
Yeah.
mean, it's hard to have points for and points against when teams run different tempos because it could favor an up tempo or a slower tempo team based on possession. So they wanted to do it versus ranking. And that just got a little complicated at the end, which I think you're going to have in a 10-week season, right? You're going to
Yeah.
have at some point the standings are going to be bunched up, whether that's within a division, first, second, third. Somebody's going to be close to the others.
Yeah, one of the interesting things about the rules was the coaches challenge and how they
Yeah.
would kind of challenge it after. I mean, they were not used to that kind of coaches challenge and behind the scenes stuff because Dean Blandino could see the call and he knew that it wasn't whatever. And then they would challenge it and he'd already just looked at it. Like was some confusion, at least with the coaches. I mean, what did you think about the instant replay and Dean Blandino in the booth as far as could that impact? I mean, the NFL looking at something doing like that.
100%. I love the rule, by the way. I love the rule. Mostly I love it because, of course, we have all the head coaches, Mike, and they start to lose their mind and they're yelling at the side judge. Well, okay, is it bark or bite, right? You want
Yeah.
to get in that guy's ear or that woman's ear. Are you doing it just to influence the next call, or are you doing it because you believe that they really missed the call? Because if you truly believe they missed the call, then challenge it.
Yeah.
It's simple. Put your money where your mouth is, right? So I love that aspect of it. Dean is so incredibly efficient at his job. He's great at it anyway, but he's also very efficient. So
Yeah.
much so that a lot of times the television coverage, we can't get to him quick enough. Like he's already looked at it. The play-ins, he's done. He and the guys in there have already filtered through it and they've looked and they've made a decision and there's something there or not there. I love the transparency of that entire process. And I think any league would be wise to adopt it. Mark, I'll add the challenge is Dean's a superstar. Like not only does he know the rule book inside and out, and he knows what it's like to be on the field and apply those rules in real time. But he's also very good on television, and he's very good at explaining the rules in a very simple and straightforward manner. If you could clone Dean, then any league could do this for any game, but it was certainly simplified because of the sample size, right? There's only one game at a time. I think there was only one time I'm aware of that games even overlap. One ran long and the other one had already started. So, by the way, I didn't get asked for a vote, but Dean would be my MVP of the league.
Oh, that's true. We didn't even think of adding him to the we had the XFL list, we had our list. So yeah, we could have thrown him in the mix, no question about it. So let's talk about the championship game. Key matchups, what should fans be looking for? I mean, these teams have already played each other. I mean, it came down to an overtime game. I was at the game. It was the first time I got to see overtime live. Are we going to see a similar matchup this go around?
I would expect, but the question is, which way are teams going to lean, right? I mean, Luis Perez had arguably two of his best games of the season. One in the championship game and one against DC, where he threw for over 300 yards and was wildly efficient. But at the same time, Arlington has now proven, especially recently, that they can lean on the running game, and they can lean on it a lot more than they did earlier in the season. It's probably a chicken or egg thing, right? I mean, is the run game more effective because Luis is more of a threat in the passing game than the previous three quarterbacks that they started over the course of the season? They're trying to figure out that position and stay healthy. I still think, and I haven't looked at the numbers, and obviously this is something we talk about in the broadcast, I still think DC should be heavily favored. I hope it's an overtime game. I mean, as broadcasters, it'd be a thrill, right?
Yeah.
You want as close a game as you can get, and the overtime rules, I think, are fantastic. But if you just look at the all-league team, right? I mean, I think Arlington had one defensive lineman on it, and DC had quarterback, running back, wide receiver, linebacker, secondary, like coach of the year. They dominated during the course of the season, and it was no fluke. I just think that they're so well built, and they're willing to change their identity based on what they need to do on the offensive side of the ball. They were run heavy, obviously, through the first probably 6 weeks of the season. Then teams started key on the run, and then Ta'amu decided, fine, I'll just go over the top and putting up crazy numbers passing the ball. And with Greg Williams, what he does from a pressure standpoint, I think it's a very simple but impactful game plan on both sides of the ball for DC.
Yeah. So how do you go now? This is the biggest game of the year. How do you go as a broadcaster? Like, how do you go and prepare for a big game like this? Is it just like any other game, or is there's a little bit more juice to this one?
Oh, there'll definitely be more juice, but I think from a presentation standpoint, and I'm kind of, pulling back the curtain here a little bit, you almost go back to square one, because primetime game on ABC, there's going to be a lot of people that get exposed to this game who haven't seen any XFL through the first, 12 calendar weeks or 11 calendar weeks, whatever it is. So you almost have to go back to basics and explain some of the rules, the setup, certainly the kickoff coverage, the coach's challenge. You have to introduce these guys. There's a lot of people who watch the league and watch spring football celebrate and know who Luis Perez is. Very few casual sports fans know who he is and know his background and know his story. And while that story may be told and retold numerous times in spring football leagues, it hasn't been told to an audience that will have the size it will have on Saturday night. So it's a bit of a reversion to starting over and reintroducing everybody. But at the same time, we have such a great feel and have developed relationships with both of these teams that I think we can better tell those stories and get into them a lot more efficiently. And Greg Williams is a big part of that story, right? I mean, he's a name that football fans know, but they may not know where he is currently and what his role is. And he's such a big personality and runs such a dynamic defense that whether it's successful or not, his willingness to take risks and send pressure will be a storyline throughout the entire game.
Yeah. Now, is ABC, ESPN planning on doing anything before the game, or is it just that when the game hits and then we're off to the races?
Well, we'll have all coverage from San Antonio. I'm sure there'll be some studio support in terms of leading up to it. I should know this, but I don't know what the
Yeah,
rest of the sporting schedule looks like on Saturday on ESPN and ABC specifically.
yeah, I haven't
But
heard
we'll have
anything.
I don't know that. But we'll have a 15-minute pregame show, self-contained. So we'll come on the air, and that, by the way, that gives us time to set the table for this
Mm,
entire matchup and to spend some time with Dwayne Johnson, with Danny Garcia, and to talk about the league and introduce the league to people who may not even know where the league exists and what markets it's in. Right? I mean,
yeah,
I can't stress this enough. Like, the audience that's available on ABC is massive, even relative to the sporting audience that finds the game on ESPN, or those who tuned into FX at times during the course of the season. So it's our job to both serve the diehard football fan and the diehard XFL fan that knows all these storylines,
hmm
and also tell big picture stories and introduce both of these teams in this league to folks who may be tuning in for the very first time.
yeah. That's interesting that for that you don't even think of that. How many more people will actually watch or even hear of the XFL for the first time after we've been through this whole season, and all
Yeah.
of us all football nerds have been involved the whole time. So now you've got the season comes to a conclusion. How do you think things are looking? I mean, we've season ticket deposits are going. There's already talk of training camps and things during the off season. What are you looking forward to for the 2024 season?
Yeah, and by the way, speaking of planning, I know that these coaches and these front offices have been planning for next season for weeks now, and that's
Oh,
some of the casual conversations that we've had, like on the field before games or on the coaching meetings that we do. It's just a few weeks ago we're talking to Hines Ward about what his team may look like next year, and these coaches, I don't want to call it a catch-22 because I feel that their first goal is to do right and buy and serve their players, and they want their players to get these opportunities to play in the fall. And I think the latest number is now 40 invitees to
hmm
camps, which is an amazing number considering the size of the league. But something that they have to deal with in terms of, well, what's our roster going to look like next year? I'd love to get player A back, but I really want him to have an opportunity to go and see what he can do at the next level. So
Yeah,
I'm looking forward to kind of figure out how those rosters shake out. I'm probably just as excited to see, like, who's the next PJ Walker, who's going to
yeah,
get an opportunity in the fall, somebody that we saw, that we followed, that we saw the talent of, and then once again, bigger audience, bigger stage, playing on NFL Sundays in the fall. And I'm really excited about that chance for a lot of these guys.
yeah. I mean, even for if you're an XFL fan and even an NFL fan, it makes the NFL preseason that much more interesting because some of these guys could potentially end up on an XFL roster, in 2024, which is, no one cared about the preseason games before. If you're an XFL fan, you should care about those games.
100%. Yeah, you're looking at the second quarterback or third quarterback in some of these scenarios who are, and by the way, it's why the XFL exists. Let's just stick with the quarterback situation, and player 54 is a great way to identify with the players who are right on that line. But as a quarterback, whether it's AJ McCarron or whomever, these are guys that get those reps in the exhibition season, which is now only down to 3 games in the NFL. But then when the real stuff starts, not only not getting game reps, but it's really hard to get practice reps too. And that's something that I didn't understand until spending time with some of the guys in the 2020 version, and learning, like, hey, listen, if you're Ben Roethlisberger's backup and you've been in Pittsburgh for 6 years, this is going back obviously a few years,
Yeah.
you're not getting opportunities. He's taking every rep in practice. He's working with his receivers, and you're standing behind him trying to learn the game and keep your skills fine-tuned. And I think that's something that a lot of fans, and most of us, we're not there. We're not at training camp. We don't have a great feel for until you really spend time with these players and learn just how challenging that can be.
Yeah, I mean, one of the other interesting aspects is that the league had played a successful year. You have these players and agents talking to other players and being like, "Hey, it went really well." I'm sure there was a lot of players that would have played in the XFL, but were potentially just waiting to see what happens on the sidelines too.
Yeah, and the guys that we've talked to have absolutely loved the experience. You know, some of them have multiple spring league experiences going back the last few years, but the way the players were treated, the efficiency of the entire situation, the professionalism, the communication, they were all, I don't want to say blown away or surprised, because that should be the expectation, but reality doesn't always work that way.
Right.
And so, you know, I'm not a player. I'm not sitting there in Arlington day after day, so I can only take their word for it. But everybody's been really impressed by the way the league has operated over the course of the season. And they deserve a lot of credit for that, because that's how you get players either A, to come back, or B, as you mentioned, agents to sell the league to other players and say, listen, it's going to be a great experience for you. And you get over there, get reps, and enjoy playing.
Yeah. So back to your background of, I mean, calling baseball and football. How does that compare, like calling a baseball game versus calling like an XFL game? I mean, how do you prepare? I mean, isn't it a completely different mindset and a different pacing when you call different sports?
Yeah, that's a great question. And the XFL is certainly different. So I try to pull from all of my experiences. You know, from a football standpoint and an X's and O's standpoint, it's very similar to what I do on SEC Saturday nights with my Southeastern Conference coverage. Cole is one of my partners there. In that the game is the game, and fans really want to learn what's happening. The big benefit is Greg McElroy's got a telestrator and he's got the play call, not just in his ear, but we all hear it. And Greg played the position for a long time. I love that aspect of it. I love that as soon as he gets a play call and they get to the line, it's almost like Madden, right? I can hit
Mhm.
X and I can see where all the routes are going. I know what a mesh route is. I know what it's supposed to look like. I know what a sail route is. I know these things. But then I'm a very visual learner. Then when he's able to draw it, then it really clicks with me. And I think there's a lot of fans out there that, you know, maybe they were gamers, maybe they played high school football, maybe they're just casual fans. But once you can see what is going to happen, it gives you an opportunity to focus on it. So that's a cool part of it. And that's a, you know, no matter what football you're covering, I think that's interesting. But then from a storytelling standpoint, there's so many unique backgrounds and personal stories and personal histories that are so fascinating with these guys who, when you cover the college game, you know, guys are 18 to 22 years old. They haven't lived a lot of life, right? I mean, there's the exception of somebody who's been through something dramatic in their life or their upbringing, but generally speaking, they're kids. These are grown men. They've had more time to experience the ups and downs, the failures and the celebrations of life. And so that's where real personal stories and personal interest comes from. So it's trying to balance all of that in one presentation with four announcers, with another like 8 mics open on the field,
Mm.
getting coordinators and coaches and quarterbacks and wide receivers and linebackers. It's a fun joyride, that's for sure.
Yeah, and it was a lot of fun. I mean, listening to guys like AJ Smith making a play, changing the play call right at the line of scrimmage, and then all of a sudden, you know, touchdown. So the experience of watching an XFL game is different than a lot of others. All right, my final question for you. Well, first, you got to go to DC and you got
Yeah.
to witness the beer snake. I mean, that's our thing. Do you think there will be a beer snake in San Antonio? I don't know if it's possible.
It's a great question. You know, we do embrace gambling in the XFL,
Mhm.
or sports betting, I suppose how we should phrase it. Um, I'd get pretty good odds that there's a beer snake. Now, that being said, every stadium is different, right? I
Yep.
mean, it's allowed at Wrigley Field. It's allowed and now encouraged at Audi Field, even though there was some confusion game one of the season as to
Yes.
why it wasn't allowed or should it be.
Mhm.
Um, so I don't know. I don't. The biggest question will be the folks at the Alamo Dome. Is that something that they want in their stadium?
Yeah.
I would say yes. Encourage it, right? Let's wrap our arms around this and let's celebrate what the league is.
Yeah, and it's a lot of money.
Yes.
Those beer snakes is very expensive
I did
construction.
a little bit of research, not Stormy Bonantoni deep because she went deep into it, but
Yeah.
$13 for a domestic beer at Audi Field. That's a lot of $13 beers to get from field level all the way to the top of the seats.
Right, right. All right. So final question, your prediction. How do you think this game is going to go? Who do you think is going to win it? And what do you think the final scores be? You think we're going to come down to, a close one again?
My heart tells me 30-28 overtime. My
Ooh,
head tells me DC's probably a little bit more comfortable than that, and it turns into like a 30-20 final. I
gotcha.
just think that their weapons on the offensive side of the ball, and they're so incredibly efficient, that they'll have a real opportunity to put some points on the board.
All right, there you go. Tom Hart, ESPN. Looking forward to your telecast this Saturday, DC Defenders, Arlington Renegades for the XFL Championship. I appreciate you coming on the program.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it, and look forward to bringing the game Saturday night on ABC.
All right.